What is up, everybody? I'm NoLuxGiven here with your afternoon snap, and today I'm going deep. Deep Space is today's brand new featured location, and this deck aims to take full advantage of it, playing a ton of really powerful cards with some drawbacks. We've got Lizard, Attuma, Sentry, Typhoid Mary, Red Skull, and Destroyer at the top of the curve. Zabu can make a lot of these cards cheaper. There's a lot of cards with drawbacks. There's a lot of 410s, that middle row right there with Attuma, Sentry, and Typhoid Mary. We also have Enchantress to take away some of the drawbacks, and then we're playing the Destroyer trifecta of Armor, Cosmo, and Professor X to take away Destroyer and Attuma's drawbacks. And also Cosmo can block Sentry's drawback, and Destroyer can blow up the Void from Sentry as well. So a lot of synergies packed into this tight list. Dracula also good with Zabu, and because it's a 4-cost card, and because we're playing all of these cards with high powers and some drawbacks. So a lot of different interesting ways to take advantage, and Deep Space just helps you take even more advantage with this deck. I found this deck to be a lot more powerful than I was initially intending. I thought it was just going to be kind of a silly deck, but it's really powerful. There's a lot of counterplay as well with Enchantress and Cosmo, and the fact that you also have Deep Space to limit your opponent's options on where they can even make relevant plays means that you are just then going to be more likely to get your opponent with those tech cards, with Armor and with Enchantress, and then you can even, with Cosmo and Enchantress, and then you can potentially lock down a location with the Professor as well to just further limit your opponent's potential plans. And this, I think, is a great game just to showcase the raw power of this deck. We skip out in the Storm location after my opponent storms there. By the way, one thing that I also love about Deep Space is that it cannot be stormed. And from there, I just commit a bunch of power to Kalintar, and I can easily win in Deep Space with Destroyer on the final turn to grab the win. I will say I'm a little bit hesitant today on playing cards to unknown locations, unless of course you're going to be playing with this deck and you play Lizard in the early game to an unknown location thinking it might be Deep Space, but otherwise cards like Nebula and Sunspot get a little bit awkward because you might be throwing them into Deep Space where they're not going to have any ability. So that's exactly what we see in this one. I throw the Lizard out there kind of against Nebula, but also kind of into Deep Space, and I was thinking this was kind of like a cheeky play from my opponent too, that maybe they were nebulaing into what could potentially be Deep Space. I mean, you kind of want to avoid the compound, I get that, but maybe if they nebulaed into Deep Space and then we unintentionally played like a Zabu there, then maybe they'd get me. But of course, that isn't how this one plays out. We're going to Cosmo and cancel out their Iron Lad, and then I'm going to drop Typhoid Mary to join the Lizard. And honestly, yeah, Deep Space is just like so easy to win in a variety of different ways in this deck that I think is pretty cool. But in this one, you might be able to see what I'm setting up for. Setting up for a, like, just we're already winning by 14 going into the final turn in Deep Space, since my opponent won't be able to add power to Deep Space this turn. We've got Avengers Compound Cosmode, and everybody has to play there. So we're probably just going to win Deep Space, and then I think I can still battle for the Compound. Despite being down by 17 power, now only 10 power, this game is really going to come down to a 50-50, but it's a 50-50 that my opponent doesn't quite know they're playing, and we're playing a very weird deck. It looks to be very much like just a Sauron list, and then all of a sudden we have Destroyer pop out here at the end game. And with the Thing and Scorpion, I guess they could have battled for the Avengers Compound, but they just had no idea I was about to drop 15 power there. They figured 10 power was already enough of a lead, and that allows me to grab another victory. In this game, I'm snapping on turn 2 when we see Deep Space and Strange Academy. Obviously, I built the deck with Deep Space in mind, But Strange Academy is also just a really fun location. It's really good with Professor X as well, and will just make things really tricky for my opponent, because if they didn't build a Deep Space deck, they're not going to want to play to Strange Academy either, because then their cards might just move over into Deep Space and lose their abilities regardless. But there's a lot of cool stuff, like I said, that we can do with Professor X. We can Professor into the Strange Academy to lock things there, and my opponent will be none the wiser, or we could Professor into the Savage Land and force everything into Deep Space, which is also a lot of fun. There's some other interesting strategies that I'll use with this deck, and we'll talk about some of those in some later games, but we could use Attuma here, and then we could go Attuma Professor. Another thing that we could do is we could go play something into the Savage Land, and that sets me up to play Sentry wherever I want. Then I could play Sentry center, and if my left location, or rather if my rightmost location is full, then I had to look at my hands to see my left and right. You caught me. If my rightmost location is full, then we won't be able to make that void from Sentry. So that's a way to void out the void. But what I decided to do instead this game is just play Dracula in the center, and the reason that I go for that is because we're not necessarily committing our power into the Strange Academy, but we're kind of committing our plays. But now I've already won in the Strange Academy, so I don't have to put something big into Dracula, and now I can put huge power into Deep Space, and nobody is expecting 20 power on the final turn without the use of She-Hulk and Shuri and things like that. 20 power, just a huge surprising play, and then we just get to barely win in the Strange Academy with Professor X, because that's already locked down. Sentry can be a little bit awkward, mostly because you need Deep Space to be one of the first 2 locations, or you can Cosmo the Sentry. I brought that up as well, but if you want to play that turn 3 Sentry off of Zabu, then you need that third location. You need one of the other 2 locations to be Deep Space. Now, there are some other locations though that can come up with Sentry that I thought were really fun. That's what I'm going to take a look at for this game and the next one. I've actually never played with Sentry before, so it was kind of cool just to see some fun things come up. This is actually only possible with Zabu Sentry to get Sentry's Void into Oscorp Tower, but I was super excited and hoping that Los Diablos did not screw up my plans, and it didn't. So we get to give my opponent a negative 10 power Void here, and now we just have to hope that they don't like destroyer that Void. It looks like my opponent could potentially be a destroyer deck, but we do have Enchantress to stop my opponent's armor from working. At the same time, we also have Cosmo, and we have our own destroyer. So I just decided to play that. Better to be proactive and play for my own game plan, especially when I don't exactly know what my opponent is doing. And it does look like they are playing some sort of ongoing list. A lot of times you'll see like Thanos in these lists, though this isn't a Thanos deck. And then from here, I just get to drop an ongoing card into Los Diablos space. Probably should have been Red Skull, but I played Typhoid Mary instead. It's just a mistake. I wasn't paying attention enough. But the plan here is to now Enchantress into Los Diablos base on the final turn. So this is a great example where you can see that we can Enchantress and then stop what my opponent is doing while also get rid of some of my own drawbacks. Just typical Enchantressing stuff here. And then I'll drop Dracula alongside that Enchantress to hopefully hit one of my 2 big cards here, Destroyer or Red Skull, for a bunch of power in the ruins. And we've got a little bit of a lead in Los Diablos base, and then hopefully by turning off Ant-Man, we will be able to, and Typhoid Mary, we'll be able to secure those leads. So we'll see what my opponent is cooking up here. It's definitely not something that you see super often. My opponent is actually playing a Shanna deck. So that's pretty cool. They are able to activate Ant-Man, though of course Ant-Man is turned off with Shanna, but they are able to pump up all of these cards with Blue Marvel and Kazar. So it is a lot of power on the last turn of the game, but it's not enough power that even discarding Lizard will still allow me to grab the win. This game uses another cool Sentry location that, again, I did not think about, and I'm actually going to decline to play Sentry into Deep Space because our third location, as we'll see here in just a moment, is Mojo World, which takes advantage of a Sentry. Minus 10 power means nothing if you can win the Mojo World. We have some rocks from Subterranea, so I'll throw those there as well. I thought this was just a creative use of some junk in this game with Mojo World as the third location. Pretty cool. Bishop, not gonna have to worry about that. This turn I'm just gonna Sentry into Subterranea, intentionally creating the void for myself, which I don't know how often this is something that you typically see in a game of Marvel Snap, so I thought this one was a lot of fun. I'm gonna snap here. We've got Subterranea. We're making good use of our rock, and we've got decent stuff here after this. We can Professor X. We also have Typhoid Mary and Attuma to drop into Deep Space, so a lot of good options here. My opponent actually drops 2 more cards into Mojo World themselves this turn. My plan was to, if they did or didn't play anything, I'm going to Professor X into Mojo World here, with the idea being that a lot of times players won't fully commit to Mojo World before, they won't fully commit to any location. So my opponent actually does decide to play a card into Mojo World here, so props to them. We are now going to wind up losing in Mojo World, but they've put so much of their resources there that I think I'm still actually gonna be okay, and they wind up retreating. In this game, I'm snapping on turn 1. We've got Deep Space and we've got Zabu, and those are both really powerful things. The rest of our hand is pretty solid as well. So I think that this is looking pretty good for me. My opponent is going to accept that snap, and then we've got Wakanda as location number 2, which honestly is not too terrible because it means we can play Destroyer and not have to worry about blowing up our own cards. So drop Zabu, and now I've got a really solid curve here. Dracula, Typhoid Mary, or Enchantress, though Asteroid M is kind of going to complicate things a little bit. So whatever we play this turn, we'll move over into Asteroid M. I'll just throw Dracula there because Typhoid Mary we can't put into Deep Space. So that part's a little bit unfortunate, that we could potentially Enchantress or Typhoid Mary in the Asteroid later on. So that's still a possibility. We'll see my opponent play in Electro, and then we draw Attuma. So that's not a terrible draw either. I'm just going to play Typhoid Mary into the Asteroid on this turn. Again, potentially prepping for a future Enchantress. Not really many other great plays that I can make here. My opponent hits me with a Hobgoblin on turn 4, and I kind of know what's up. I know a Galactus deck when I seize it, and unfortunately, we can't use Professor X to beat Galactus here. Typically, Professor X would be a great play into where you know your opponent is going to play Galactus, and that's why Professor X is a little bit stronger today. If my opponent did not Hobgoblin me, I could just Professor X center, they would Galactus, and Professor X would win me the game. But we're going to have to get a little bit more creative in this one. I'm going to drop Sentry in that center location, seeing that my opponent has priority, and Sentry isn't actually going to have to move over because Asteroid M is going to get destroyed by Galactus. So now I am winning going into this final turn, which isn't always a great thing playing against a Galactus list, but this is a Wakanda game as the sole location, so now I can just drop Destroyer, and my opponent will have to play 17 power on this final turn. They can't Shang-Chi. Null isn't going to be enough. They have Death plus one other thing. Do they have Death plus, like, Lizard? No, that won't do it. Wolverine won't do it either, and we grab the victory. This game is a great example of how Deep Space can contribute to lockdown strategies and just give your opponent not really any room to do the cool stuff that they're trying to do, which is why I'm personally not playing Galactus today. I didn't want to play my armor on turn 1 because I didn't know where it would be the best, and with Elysium it's cheap enough that I can not worry about spending all of my energy each turn, and then when I see my opponent play Wolverine, I figure that's a good enough place as any to drop my armor. My opponent follows up with an Electro and a Yondu into Elysium, so definitely probably a Galactus list. Maybe a Destroyer blend of Galactus, but seems like very likely to be a Galactus list, and Deep Space, like I said, is pretty fantastic here. They can't Galactus into Elysium, obviously, and if we Cosmo into the Hellfire Club, means they can't Galactus at all. So this is obviously really strong. We'll have no problem winning Deep Space, and we can use Cosmo to potentially help us win in the other locations as well. Like we can drop Sentry into Hellfire Club here. So a lot of options. My opponent's going to wave, and then they're going to see my Cosmo and retreat. I believe I brought this up at the top of the video, but the other thing that Deep Space can do, because it isn't great to play ongoing cards or positive ongoing cards into Deep Space, it just lets you know where to play your Enchantress. Now this game I also know where to play my Enchantress because my opponent plays the turn 2 Invisible Woman, and they've got a MODOK avatar, so they're kind of giving away what their strategy might potentially be, and an Enchantress on turn 5 is basically going to completely destroy their plans. Now, I can kind of like force them into this play even more so here with Deep Space turning off one of the locations, and then I can Cosmo into the rightmost location just in case they get any funny ideas and want to try to deviate from this MODOK plan. I'm going to lock them in. We're going to center them in, and then we're going to lock them in and lock them out. So that's the game plan here. Just Enchantress into Invisible Woman, but it's satisfying to make your opponent discard their whole hand on turn 5, especially if you can hit that Hela. It's going to be awkward if we don't hit the Hela, so hopefully we can do that. We turn off our Zabu here. Here comes the MODOK. Let's see what they got. They've got Morbius, Death, Hellcow, Giganto, Ghost Rider, and they've got the Hela as well. They saved the best one for last, but we're going to play Destroyer, and they're just going to retreat.
Condo's not great for me, but we'll see what we can do here.
I also got to play one of my first games against Binks, which was really fun, so we'll take a look at this game here as well. This was one of the first games that I actually played with the deck.
Oh, it's no looks given.
And yeah, was cool to be able to play it up against Binks. Had no clue what he was trying to do. He was playing a really spicy deck here, and my deck was also spicy. I was playing Lizard to hope to find Deep Space, but that turned out to be Asgard, which is still kind of fine for me because we're already winning there, and now we can use that to draw some additional cards, and this was a pretty big read.
That was a very rude counter to what I was playing. That was an unbelievably rude response.
I had no clue what Binks was playing. It almost looked like I'm sniping there or something, but I was just trying to commit more power into Asgard to make sure that I win that location, and I think this play will solidify the fact that I'm not sniping because I wouldn't have Enchantressed my armor, but I really just wanted to win Asgard to get the game kicked off.
They Enchantress their armor? Why would you do that? You fool. You've activated my trap card.
And yeah, Binks' deck relies very heavily on being able to destroy cards here.
Extend the game here.
With
potentially even Odin, right?
With Odin on Gambit and Wong.
Now Binks, yeah, now
crazy stuff like that. So yeah, Magic to turn off Wakanda.
Professor
again,
X, what the hell, man?
Just a lucky read. I figured that maybe they would... I mean, it was a 50-50, right? And I guessed right. And now I win in the Oscorp Tower. So I just have to win one other location.
White Tiger helps us win quite a bit here, right? And White Tiger, the Odin will make the Iron Lad huge. So we're at 8, like 15 power, right? It's gonna be hard for them to get over the top there. It's like 26. Spider-Man, right? Don't say that. Shut up.
I'm mostly going to let the rest of it play out from Binks' perspective here to finish off this game.
They don't know where to place it.
I did not know where to place my Cosmo. I did have a Cosmo.
Titania.
I did say this was one of the first games I played. I forgot to put Zabu in the deck, so I've got Titania in instead.
I almost always win right here.
It's not going to be
winning left is a bit of a different issue. Depends on how much power they can push over there. We are getting a Gambit trigger, though, which is kind of nice. They did have Cosmo, but they used it in the wrong location, chat. Absolute fools. Okay, we need the Gambit trigger to land in one of these 3. Very nice. Good start. And then this just can't be more than 12. They have 4 cards in hand. It's always Infinite though, right? Oh, it's exactly 12!
Red Skull for 12.
Son of a bitch. GG's no Lux given. I bet he probably had a pretty solid hand though. It was probably like a 50-50 if they would beat us there. They probably had at least one of their cards that was over 12 or over. It can't be too tough on it.
And I did, in fact. If we take a look at my hand, I had Red Skull and Destroyer, which were both hits, and then Atuma and Typhoid Mary were misses, but still pretty big cards. So yeah, I was pretty confident there, and we were able to just barely grab the win. Binks is always a great sport. That's going to be it for me today. Thank you guys very much for watching. Hopefully you can have some fun with this deck with Deep Space as the featured location. It's a lot more powerful than I thought it was going to be, and I was super satisfied after a lot of my games, a lot of close ones, a lot of really good and interactive Marvel Snap. But for today, that's going to be it for me. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm No Lux Given. Peace.